All right, so this presentation is over population. We discussed this last Friday. All right, so just a couple of things. This is just some basic facts. We have about it says 7.1 billion on here. It's really about 7.5 billion people on Earth. So we see around 230,000 people born each day. So obviously this is a big problem that we're facing is overpopulation. And most of these births occur in the developing world. So your poor countries on Earth is where you're seeing most of the growth. So the first thing you need to know is what birth rate is, and so that's number of live births per 1,000 in a population. So that's how we figure birth rate. So Niger in Africa has the highest. Latvia is one of the lowest in the world. There's other European countries that are right around kind of tied with them. And then that link Poodwaddle is where you can go and see that clock I showed in class, the population clock. All right, then fertility rate is just the average number of children a woman of childbearing years would have in her lifetime. So the world average is 3, which means we're growing. If it were to be at 2, that means our population would stay steady, wouldn't be growing or shrinking. If it was below 2, we would shrink. And so that's why China had the one-child policy for a while, is try to increase, or not increase the population, but try to decrease the population over time. The mortality rate is the number of deaths per 1,000 of the population. So to figure out how your population is changing in a country, you need to look at your birth rate, the mortality rate, and then migration. So the U.S., for example, we do not grow through birth rate, but we do grow through migration. So that's how we've increased the amount of people living here in the U.S. is purely through immigrants coming in. And I'll skip that and go on to gender imbalances within a country. So there's some things that can cause maybe a country to have more females than males or vice versa. So war, for example, well, it's mainly men that go off and fight in war. And in some cultures, it's only men. And that can cause low birth rates, of course, during a war. And then also you can see maybe more women in a generation alive because maybe a lot of the men are killed during a war. And then usually after war, you will see some kind of baby boom after that. And then in some cultures, especially in Eastern Asia and South Asia, you'll see a preference for boys. And so in China, for example, with the one-child policy, the preference was on boys, and so this led to horrible things like infanticide. If they had a girl, they would leave the girl baby out to die. And so this leads to more men in the population than you have women. And I mentioned that as a problem. With my generation in China, there's not enough women for them because they were either killed or they've been adopted out to other countries. And remember, MDC stands for most developed countries. So your most developed countries, women live longer. So you're going to see a gender imbalance along the where the elderly are. So you'll see more women than men in the elderly population because of that. And then population pyramids. We discussed this in class. You need to know how to interpret population pyramids. Because this is going to be on like every test. So you got Austria and then Jordan over here. Jordan's in the Middle East. Austria is in Europe. This is not Australia. This is Austria next to Germany and Italy and Switzerland. So you have males on one side, females on the other. You see the age breakdown on the side, and then you see population in thousands down here. And so you can see in Austria, for example, you have more adults. You kind of have like a baby boom here. You can see these adults here aren't having as many children. It's dropping down a good amount. So this is going to be a wealthier country. They're having less kids. Adults live healthy, long lives. And again, you see that natural drop-off of males and females living longer. So they have a good healthcare system. They're going to have a good education system. Infrastructure overall is just going to be really good. So this is going to be a highly functioning country. This is going to be a more developed country. And then Jordan's going to be a lesser developed country. You can tell this because most of the population is way down here, kind of the lower half. So not very many adults, but they're having a lot of kids. And the education system's not going to be as good. Education system, or I think just said the medical system's not going to be as good. Stuff like that. All of it's going to be suffering because keep in mind it's adults that run the country. And here in Austria, you have a lot of adults to be able to run the country and all the systems necessary for the country to function. In Jordan, you're not going to have that. You're not going to have enough teachers and doctors and people who work in the government and things of that sort. And so any kind of emergency service, it isn't really going to be there. And of course, you see a big drop off here. This is just in the lower 30s. And this could be, of course, due to war and things like that. But it drops off very significantly as you get into the 40s and 50s. And so, again, dying early And so infrastructure is not going to be as good. So remember, if it looks more like a pyramid like this, then most likely it's not going to be a very highly developed country. It'll be on the lower end. If it looks more like a column and more kind of, a little bit fatter in the middle where the adults are, then that's going to be a healthier country, economically speaking. All right, and then a couple other terms. Population density is just the average number of people who live in a measurable area. Population distribution shows, where people are throughout the world or in an area, like, because we're not evenly divided whatsoever. And then carrying capacity, that's going to be a key term that comes up quite a bit. That's the number of organisms a piece of land can support. So we could take that and look at China, for example. How many people can China support until that land can't support any more people? And of course, here we're looking at like natural resources. We're looking at how much land do they have that you can farm on and actually grow enough to support them. Yeah, I'm recording, but it's okay. That's fine. Yeah, go ahead.
Why not?
All right, so and then we could also look at the whole world. How much can the whole world support? How much food can we grow? What kind of natural resources do we have? Because remember, a lot of our resources are finite. We'll run out eventually. And so, generally speaking, for the Earth, is about 12 billion is where most scientists and geographers say that's where we're going to reach our limit at planet Earth. And so here on this map, you can see population distribution and density. So you can see the density is very heavy in India, in China, Japan, and then over here in Indonesia, and then of course eastern half of the U.S., and then Central and Eastern Europe. Western Europe, Eastern Europe, a little bit there. That's where most of the population is, and of course right along the Nile there as well, then over around Lagos. But most of the population is going to be here, and then over to Europe, and then over here to the U.S. And to break it down, like here in the U.S., here's the top 25 cities, and this is back in 2004, but it's really pretty much the same. Dallas is still number 9. We only have 9 or maybe 10 cities now that have 1 million people or more. Compare that to China, that has 100 cities or more with over 1 million people. And so our cities are much smaller compared to that, for example. But you'll also notice how many are in Texas. Texas has seen a lot of growth. And so we got San Antonio, Houston, San Antonio, Dallas is on here. Then go down to Austin, Fort Worth, El Paso. So most of our major cities, pretty much all of them are on this list. And then this shows the density and then, of course, distribution as well within cities. So in New York City, for example, most of it's in lower Manhattan is where you see the peak density. And then Mumbai, India. So population density of a city can vary depending what part of the city you're talking about. So Mumbai's population 12 million. You can see the peak density there. And so these are just different examples of that. So just know how to, basically understand density and things of that sort and distribution. We'll skip past that. And then this is the world at night. Another way to look at population is looking at the lights. So this is basically what the Earth looks like from space at night. You can see the lights spread out across the world. Now, of course, when you're in space, only half the Earth is dark, so you can only see one half at a time. But so this is a composite photograph. But you can see basically right along I-35 right here, and then to the east is where our density is the highest. And then and you can see in Canada, pretty much near the border is where most people live because it gets really cold. In South America, mainly along the coastline. Europe is just lit up, especially, basically from really Poland and west is very highly, densely populated. Then you can see with Russia, it goes along their southern border because that's where it's warmer compared to Siberia. So that's mainly stretched there. India, again, is all lit up. Middle East as well, especially there's the Nile. You can track the Nile right there. And then, of course, Japan, South Korea, North Korea is this little dark spot. They don't have that much electricity there. So, of course, the only limits of this kind of map, looking at where lights are, is that you have some parts of the world that just don't have good infrastructure. So there may be people living there, but they just don't have access to electricity. And this is just looking at the U.S. Between 1985 and the year 2000. You can see how quickly that changed here in the U.S. And so, again, most of this growth is purely immigration, people moving here. And then also immigration within the U.S. You notice that if you look at the east side and then going west from 85 to year 2000, you see this westward expansion. So more people moving to the south and to the west still today. So that area of the U.S. is growing the most. Then these last two curves, we talked about this. This will definitely be on the test and quiz. This is the J curve. And so the J curve shows population over time throughout human history. So most of human history has been really low. It has not grown very fast. You get to the time of Jesus, there's about 250 million, 280 million people, somewhere in that region. And then it starts growing pretty steadily until the 1300s. You get to the Black Death. The Black Death kills about a third to a half of mankind. So we drop off. But then after that, you see this rebound, like a really good rebound. And a lot of that came from a lot of inventions and stuff like that. So we started mechanizing farming and stuff. So basically, we're able to farm more food. We got better nutrition. Europeans started exploring, came across corn and potatoes and things like that. So the diet got better. And people just started living a little bit healthier lives. And so you start seeing population increase until you get to the 1800s. We hit our first billion in 1850. And after that, you get refrigeration and antibiotics, basically, and shots. So, and things like that. And then that's where we skyrocket. So basically, better nutrition, finding new foods, and then bam, we hit better medicine and then refrigeration, so we can actually keep our food and eat more protein and eat fish and things like that. Our diets improve, and then things just go crazy. So we hit our first billion in 1850, 2 billion in 1950, 4 billion in 1980, and now we're at 7.5 billion. So this is exponential growth going. And so that's the problem we're hitting now is what are we going to do? Because we're still going up. So how are we going to manage a higher population? What are we going to do to adapt? Really this century, it's going to come to a head. And right with that, as population's increasing, that's coming to a head. We also have the end of oil. So, because oil's got 47 years, with what we have access to now. So you have population growing, oil's going to be running out in a half century. What are we going to do to adapt to a world without oil and with a growing population? And then the demographic transition model. So this is looking at the stages a country goes through in its growth. So again, definitely questions over on the test on this. And so it's really a simple model. It may look confusing, but it's pretty simple. So stage 1 is basically your poorest countries on earth. Stage 2 is a country that's developing like Mexico. Stage 3 is a developed country like the United States or your Western European countries like France and Germany. So stage 1, maybe like Sub-Saharan Africa, those countries there. So birth rate and death rate are really high. Sometimes the death rate is higher than the birth rate, so the country's actually shrinking in population. So population stays low. Then they get to stage 2. They start developing. They start moving to urban areas. You start seeing factories come in. Their jobs are changing. They're going from working on farms to working in factories. And because of that, their lifestyle, of course, is completely changing. So they get better access to medicine and things of that sort. So death rate starts dropping pretty quickly. It doesn't take long for the death rate to drop in response to better medicine and living conditions. But the birth rate stays pretty high because this is a cultural thing. It takes longer for the culture to change over time. So the birth rate stays really high. And so all of this area in between the death rate and the birth rate, this is all growth. And so this is why this line is shooting up, the population line, because of this gap here. And so over time, people realize, wait a second, we don't need as many kids. Our kids are actually living, because back here, half your kids die before age 5. Here, 3/4 of them are living, if not more. And your standard of living is getting better, and kids go from making you money here to costing you money here. And so now you're starting to have less kids. The culture begins to change. The next few generations. So you're going to see a couple of generations in here. So keep in mind, as you transition, you're going to see, maybe 3-4 generations come through before it finally drops down. And then you get to stage 3 where we are, where birth rate and death rate are similar. Population is maxed out. And then it may begin to drop. But of course, we have immigrants coming in, so ours still grows, but not because of this. So to give you an example, the United States was in stage 2 100 years ago. Average family had 8 kids. So this is where we were. We were industrializing, but still there was a lot of parents that were farmers that had a lot of kids. And therefore, this is where we were 100 years ago. Now we are here in what's called a post-industrial economy. But we'll talk more about that when we talk about economics. All right, so that's it. So again, just really make sure you look back at, know your key terms, but definitely look back at these two graphs, the J curve and demographic transition model.